I am Ryan Corpo, co-coordinator of Pax Christi, New York State. I am joined today by Jim Albertini, who was named a Teacher of Peace in 2010. Born in Mount Carmel, Jim Albertini is the founding director of the Malu Aina Center for Nonviolent Education and Action in Kurtistown, Hawaii. After engaging in anti-war protests as a student at Villanova University in the late 1960s, Jim moved to Hawaii in 1970 to work as a Catholic school teacher. In 1972, after participating in a protest where he poured animal blood on classified military files at Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu, Jim was fired from his teaching position. Despite being banned from the base, he returned to Hickam in 1981 during an open house and engaged in a nonviolent demonstration against nuclear weapons. In the 1985 decision of United States v. Albertini, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Jim and held that the First Amendment does not protect leafleting at a military installation. Today, Jim stands in continued opposition to the militarization of Hawaii. As he writes in his emails, aloha, Jim. Thank you for joining us.
Aloha, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
And Isaac Chandler, who is the former National Council Chair and current Ambassador of Peace for Pax Christi, will be joining us in a few minutes. I wanted to begin with the questions. The beginnings of the Malu Aina Center trace back to a donation of 22 acres of land in 1979. What prompted you to start this center?
Well, that's an important question because it really is a direction of life for me. As you mentioned, I was born in Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania, a small coal mining town of about 8,000 people, and went through Catholic schools from kindergarten right through university. And then I taught school for 2 years in Pennsylvania before moving to Hawaii in 1970. And I was fired from teaching in the Catholic schools, by the way, in 1972 for that Vietnam War protest. That was, by the way, that was pouring human blood, not animal blood, on the top secret files at Hickam Air Force Base with Jim Douglas, taken from a number of us in Catholic Action. After I was fired from teaching, the University of Hawaii Christian Ministry offered me to start a peace education center at the University of Hawaii, and they gave me a small stipend to live. So that's what I did from 1972 until 1980. But during those years of both Vietnam protests and anti-nuclear protests, I was drawn to the grassroots Native Hawaiian struggles for justice. Many Native Hawaiians were being evicted from their homes and their farms to make way for luxury resorts or for military bases, etc. And I thought the issue of peace and justice have to be connected. And so the peace groups need to be grounded in these struggles for justice of the Hawaiian people. So I used to speak strongly about that to get the peace movement more aligned with the justice struggles of the Native peoples in Hawaii. And it was out of that that a family said, we have this 22 acres of land on the Big Island, if you could make use of it somehow. Now, I was also involved with the Catholic worker movement. You know, I visited the Tivoli farm back in, 1970, I think it was, and visited other Catholic workers' farms, and also the farm in Georgia that helped spark the Habitat for Humanity movement. So I said to the person donating the land, sure, what we need is a base to work for justice and peace, and the land provides that base. So it was land that there were no buildings, no roads, nothing. We started grassroots. I came here with a machete and a tent in 1980 and planted the first bananas. Some of the land had been former sugarcane land abandoned 30 years earlier. And then there were 14 acres of forest land, rainforest here. So we started from scratch, building our own shelters, growing our own food, and catching our own rainwater. So everything was really basic here, you know, from the ground up. and then to establish a base to work for justice and peace where you can't get fired. I didn't want to put the land in my name for principled reasons and practical reasons. When you're hauled into court, the first questions the court asks is, what assets do you have? So we formed a nonprofit organization to protect the land from being seized for individual resistance actions. And that's how we've worked. And we worked on the principle of no government grants or foundation type of money, too many strings attached. It would be all supported by our grassroots effort. In the early days, we marketed some of the farm produce to help pay for the basic expenses. And we all are volunteers here. And in fact, within a couple of months in January, Martha Hennessy, Dorothy Day's granddaughter, will be coming back for another visit of a few weeks. She's volunteered here before at our farm. So there's a strong Catholic worker connection here to the farm. But basically, we're small. Usually a few of us in residence, although right now I'm here by myself, along with the dog and the other animals from the farm. But we usually have a few residents and other volunteers helping out. But COVID has made a big problem out of all of that. We've had to be very careful on health concerns. So we continue the social activism, but our farm crops, we still have a lot of fruit trees we planted. But our farm row crops, we've kind of cut back on that because of the COVID. So that give you a little background on our farm, huh?
Yes, it does. And Isaac,
let me make one thing.
Yes.
One of the land struggles of Native Hawaiians I was involved in before moving over here were Native Hawaiians with leprosy, Hansen's disease. Where Father Damien went to Molokai back in the 1800s. And these Hawaiian leprosy patients were being evicted from their homes. So myself and others went there to support, to see what organizing we could do. And we helped keep them in their homes for 5 years. And when I started Malawaina, they were so grateful for our support that they said, we want to make a donation. So the cabin that I've lived in is basically a recycled lumber shed from that leprosy settlement, out of appreciation for the organizing for justice and peace. And they were always involved in the peace marches and all on Oahu too, the Hawaiian leprosy patients. So that's a grassroots kind of solidarity message, and in fact, the name Maluaina came from the leader, Bernard Punikaya, the leader of that Hale Mohalu leprosy settlement.
Thank you for telling us about the beginnings of Maluaina. Isaac has joined us, and I want to give him the
A
opportunity.
little louder, please.
I'm sorry, Isaac has joined us, and I want to give him the opportunity to start with his questions.
Hello, Jim. I'm Isaac Chandler. I'm sorry I missed the beginning.
Aloha, Isaac. I can hear you a little better.
Oh, okay. Aloha, sir. Very honored to meet you. I'm a former member of the council. I was former chair of the council in 2022, ambassador of peace. So it's an honor to meet you, sir. My first question for you is, how did you first become involved in the work of Pax Christi USA?
Well, I think Pax Christi is celebrated the 50 years now. So 72 was the start of that. And that was the time when I was starting the Catholic Action Group after being fired from my Catholic school teaching job. And right before that, I remember being involved with the National Catholic Association of Laity. And I think it was out of that really Pax Christi evolved as a strong peace voice. So I think it would have been back in the early 70s. And I know you had Jim Douglas and Shelley Douglas on too. They were old friends of mine from the days we poured our blood together at the Hickam Air Force Base. So from the early 70s, that's how Pax Christi. And again, my background it's that grassroots Catholic principles. I don't push my Catholicism on people, but it's certainly from my mother and dad and my family, it's strong rooted. And it's the basic principles of nonviolence and all that we survive on. In fact, right behind me, I don't know if you can see, there's a little bookshelf here. It's called Basic Readings of Malawaina. When we have volunteers here, I urge people to look at this bookshelf first. And there's books there by Jim Douglas, by Dan Berrigan, by Dorothy Day, by Martin Luther King, Gordon Zahn, Franz Jägerstätter, the type of, so it's readings that really have a strong Catholic background and the nonviolence. In fact, we have a course of, was it Richard McSorley from Georgetown on nonviolence. Is right here on the shelf too. So it's that nonviolence, that Pax Christi, the issues of justice, peace, anti-racism is a core. You know, in Hawaii, this island is the most multi-ethnic county in the entire United States where I live in. And the Hawaiian people are suffering great injustices and all. So you can't be involved in peace without being involved in the justice struggles of people. I
Jim,
hope that responds a little bit to your question.
Jim, you've made a number of public references to the illegal occupation of Hawaii by the United States government. And I'm wondering if you can explain what you mean by that.
Yes. You know, when I came to Hawaii, I knew it was a strong military bastion here, but I really didn't know the history. And by getting involved in the grassroots struggles, you quickly learn the history. And the basic situation is this. It was 1887 that the sugar barons here formed what they called the Bayonet Constitution on the independent nation of Hawaii, the monarchy at that time, and forced changes in the makeup of the government. And then that wasn't enough. In 1893, there was an illegal overthrow, a coup d'etat here, with the direct assistance of the United States military, landing troops, armed troops right across from the palace when the sugar people took over. They called themselves the Committee of Safety to really overthrow the government. And it was basically for economic reasons so that they wouldn't have sugar tariffs going to the continental United States. But behind it all was the US military presence. Part of that Bayonet Constitution in 1887, the military took exclusive use of Pearl Harbor, which is today, of course, the major military naval base in the Pacific, one of them. And today, Hawaii has over 110 military installations, 25% of the island of Oahu. And here on Hawaii Island, I've documented 57 present or former bases. But I have a map here of Hawaii Island. I don't know if you can see it here, but right in the center, this is called the Pohakuloa Training Area. This is 133,000 acre military base where they train all kinds of weapons, including nuclear training there, nuclear war training. B-2 bombers, B-52s fly from Missouri, Louisiana, and Guam and drop bombs here, training for nuclear war. And they've contaminated the land with depleted uranium that was denied for decades, but we confirmed it in 2007, 2008. And that's right in the center of the island where they continue to bomb and disperse this DU oxide particles around the island. This island has high birth defects of all the other islands here. And there's probably cancer links as well, but it's very hard to document and align the cancers with the specific things at Pohakuloa. But Hawaii in general is a contaminated Superfund site from the US military, and it's in great contrast to this image of paradise in the Pacific that's projected for the tourist industry. So that's a little background on this overthrow, and it's just gotten worse and worse, especially for the native people being pushed to the majority of homeless are Native Hawaiian people today, and displaced from land, etc. And today, Hawaii, instead of being 100% sufficient in its food, it imports 90% of the food that's consumed here in Hawaii. So a real upside down situation has developed in the last 100 years.
Incredible. You know, a thing that I'm just so taken aback by is the fact that in just that little paragraph right there, you've talked about so many of our pillars. I've heard all four of the four pillars intertwined in this whole situation that we call Hawaii. It's quite fascinating. So what are your hopes then, Jim, for the future of the Catholic peace movement and for peacemaking in general?
That's an important question for the whole country, of especially all people that have a spiritual background. You know, we're living in this time right now that to speak out for peace, for ceasefire, for negotiation, for an end to war is really being marginalized more and more. We see just recently with the Congress people, the progressives, being cowed into revoking that simple statement calling for negotiations and ceasefire. So we need to speak out, much more forcefully in a nonviolent way to end this war in Ukraine, to end this threat of nuclear war, not only with Russia, but with China. It seems clear that the United States is pushing this global unipolar world that it wants to maintain. And so any rising power, especially China, is considered a threat. And people need to do little things and think of the idea of a bucket being filled with drops of water. We need to contribute to a voice, keep it alive. One of the things that we do here that I would encourage others to do in all of their communities, we have a weekly peace vigil. In fact, it's today, Friday. Today will mark our 1100th consecutive week of a peace vigil at the downtown Federal Building Post Office in Hilo. And every week I write a new leaflet. Today's leaflet is on our website. I have a copy of it here. I don't know if you can see that picture there. It's a picture of Saint Javelin, I call it. It's glorifying war. There is a saint holding in her bosom a Javelin missile, many of which we're exporting to Ukraine today. And then on the back of this is about the public restrooms being locked shut at the post office in downtown Hilo. So that goes together, the injustice for the homeless and the poor with the issue of 800 billion going to the war machine, and yet the Federal Building in Hilo closes its public restrooms because they say the homeless make a mess. We need to connect those kind of issues. Now, every week, again, I do a peace leaflet. Here's one of Pope Francis's statement from a few weeks ago. End the war in Ukraine. I don't know if you can see it there, but every week. These are published on our website. We hand out a few hundred copies, and we have the thing where people can take a picture of it with their phone down there at the post office, so to cut back on printing of paper. These go out all around the world. But simple gestures like that of keeping a voice of peace alive, I think is important. We need to find ways to unite. And just last week, there was a protest in 50 cities across the country on the nuclear issue, saying no to nuclear war. So we try to join in different gatherings when we can of solidarity, but keep our own voice alive and encourage these kind of peace vigils in all kind of communities. Don't be intimidated by this growing voice in support of war and pumping more and more weapons into Ukraine. So find little ways to exercise your voice. Keep the pressure on Congress, letters to the editor, but a public witness is important.
Jim, in an interview this past February, you cited the 1963 encyclical Pacem in Terris as a major influence for you. Can you describe what makes Pacem in Terris, which turns 60 next year, so important for your life?
Well, yeah, you know more about me than I thought. I appreciate that. But yeah, I was in Catholic high school in the little town of Pennsylvania. It was just a parish school. But that Pacem in Terris, I believe, was 63, right? That came out the year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which now we're celebrating 60 years right now of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, I think there's a link there in my view. Kennedy was really moved by his military people that wanted to attack Cuba, the missiles, and even issue a first strike against Russia or the Soviet Union at the time. He had to back off that and create these back channels with Khrushchev to get an agreement to defuse a nuclear war over Cuba. And many Americans know that the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba, but not as many know that the US agreed to remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey at the time. That was the agreement between Khrushchev and Kennedy. And I remember being in our innermost hallway saying the rosary during the Cuban Missile Crisis with our family at that time. And Kennedy, after 62, then he issued this famous address at American University in DC in June of 63, I believe it was, very strong speech of the need for peace, disarmament. And that year too was the Pacem in Terris. So to me, that was a breakthrough year of urging nonviolence, urging reversal of the trend of an arms race. And perhaps that led to Kennedy's death too, the killing of Kennedy. Right back here on this shelf, one of the books is Jim Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable, about the assassination of Kennedy, which I think is one of the most important books written in my lifetime. And of course, Martin Luther King's book is up here about his assassination. And so I just think Pacem in Terris was a call to nonviolence, along with Kennedy's speech in American University. And this is a message we have to keep visible today through our own lives, you know. Maybe I could just add a couple things here. You know, our farm, we've had lots of volunteers here over the years. As you know, people come here not only to learn simple things of growing food to share with people in need, but also to learn organizing skills for justice and peace. And that's what I think gives it a value. And we've had some remarkable people here over the years. One of the first volunteers who came here when I started was a Japanese American man named Yugo Okubo. And he was one of the what's called the Varsity Victory Volunteers who enlisted in World War II to prove their Americanism, because the racism against Japanese was very strong. And he was sent behind German lines in a glider and wounded in Italy. And after the war transformed him. He became a pacifist. But he calls his claim to fame as he went from hero for being one of the Japanese Americans to enlist in the war. He was jailed as a non-American for union organizing within 5 years after the war, under the McCarthy era. And when he heard I was starting the farm here, he wanted to come, and he lived here for 8 years on the farm. In fact, he was the only person who's ever died here. But it was a great honor to have him, Yugo Okubo, as an example. Another friend who was involved in 1984, I was involved in a blockade of a nuclear warship in Hilo Harbor. This island, Hawaii Island, was the first county in the United States to pass a law declaring itself a nuclear-free zone. Yet the military kept sending nuclear warships in here. So after 3 years of politely requesting, we said, the next ship coming, we were going to have a nonviolent swimming blockade. And myself and another friend, Warren Weinman, who helped in the building of this building I'm sitting in, he was a former naval officer. He and I and another friend did a swimming protest along with hundreds on the Hilo docks. But we were threatened with felonies. So we had 100 people wanting to jump into the bay to block the warship. But sometimes you have to say to people, don't do the right thing for the wrong reason. When they're threatening felony, you need to think it through, discuss it with your families. Don't do it on an emotional feeling. So 3 of us entered the water. I was given 3 years in prison for that swim. I fortunately was kicked out after a little more than a year because of international protest. My other 2 friends, Warren Wyman, he got a lien put on his house, and the other friend, Jim Schneider, got 60 days in jail. But as the leader, a federal judge was brought in here from the continent who was a 29-year Navy lieutenant commander and declared our nuclear-free law irrelevant, you're guilty, and you're going to prison for 3 years. So it's these volunteers that really, some of their ashes are here in a little altar that we built on the farm. And Thanksgiving for the land that feeds us. Some of these friends over the years. But I urge people to do what you can. You know, nonviolent civil disobedience is an important tool in the symphony of social change, as Martin Luther King said. But there's a lot of other instruments people can play. And we all have to learn how to play today 1, 2, 3, or 5 different instruments. You know, artists have a role, writers have a role, people who make food for everything can have a role. Everybody has a role. So it's urgent time. In my view, it's more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62. And we need the spirit of Pacem in Terris to come forward again to help us sustain this work for peace and justice. You know, and in Hawaii, we use the phrase aloha aina, which really means love one another and the earth itself. You know, it has to be connected. That climate disaster with nuclear war, the 2 greatest threats to life on the planet. And all along the way, the struggles for justice are key too. You know? Carry on, and mahalo for your help. Okay.
Okay.
Aloha.
Aloha.